Hi, welcome to this week's episode of the Wellbeing Show. I've got a professor with us this week who's joining us all the way from New York, which is one of my favorite places on the planet. So I live in London, I love New York and Paris. Those are the three, I think. All other cities in the world, I love you, but not quite as much as those three, I have to say. So I'm just going to take the flak for that one, whenever it comes my way. Barbara Gitenstein. Did I say that correctly, Barbara?
I usually say Gitenstein, but Gitenstein works too.
Gitenstein, that's fine. You say Stein, I say Steen. We'll
There
figure that
you
one
go.
out. Here we go. Let's not start talking about tomatoes. It could get really confusing very quickly.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us. What time is it where you are at the moment?
It's 10 o'clock, about 10:30.
10:30, so not
Yeah.
too bad.
Yeah.
And you're in Manhattan, did you say?
I am. I moved here after I retired.
Wow.
I love the opera, and I wanted to be able to go every time I could.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's a good place to go and do all the arts, I think, Manhattan.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Super thriving culture. I'm trying to remember the name. There's a particular museum which is just off Central Park, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. It'll come back to
You mean
me.
the Metropolitan Museum of Art?
No, not MoMA. I love that
Oh,
one.
no, MoMA is the Museum of Modern Art.
Yeah, no, not the Metropolitan, not the Met. It isn't the Met. It's a small family one.
Oh, excuse me.
So, and I'm trying to remember the name. It'll come back to me, but
Okay.
I'm sure you've been. But I love Manhattan. What drove you? What made you decide to retire into Manhattan? Were you from New
No,
York?
part of it was, again, I do love the arts, and I do love particularly music, and I wanted to be there. The other thing is that I don't think people realize, now this is if you have money,
Yeah.
it's a great place to live as you age, because you don't need a car.
Oh, yes, of course.
And I mean, there's such wonderful transportation. Um,
Yes.
I don't need to worry about that. We don't own a car anymore, and we're very
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah. 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 There was no point in owning a car in Manhattan, actually.
Yeah.
I seem to remember when I've been there. It's like in
Yeah.
London, although London's bigger. I don't own a car in London because it's a waste of time.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
hire a car if I need one. Otherwise, I walk, I cycle, I use public transit, etc. And
Yeah.
that was one of the things I always liked about Manhattan. It had a very familiar feel to me.
Yeah. I love London too. It's a wonderful
Yeah,
place.
yeah. So you were a boss of a university. That's how I think of you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, nobody is the boss of the faculty, as you probably heard.
I can
But yes, I
Many
was the
people have
CEO.
tried that one and failed
Many people have
miserably.
tried, they've all failed, sometimes
So,
miserably.
tell us, were you from the East Coast originally? Is that where you grew up?
Well, interestingly, I was born in a small town in South Alabama,
Okay,
right on the panhandle of Florida.
right.
And my parents, however, were from New York City. So I grew up they were Jewish, and
Yeah.
I mean and I am Jewish, and
Yeah.
and growing up in a small town in South Alabama was a very strange place. But
I,
we
I
had
can't,
sort of
don't
this,
connect the two, I have to say.
well, it was
Jewish
very unusual.
intellectual liberal and South Alabama aren't the
Yeah,
same.
well,
It's
it
not the
was
sentence
strange.
that comes to mind, right?
But to be serious, I think it does help explain some of
Yeah,
my ability to communicate across difference, because I
yeah,
had to do that very early on.
yeah,
Otherwise, I couldn't communicate at all. Now, I will say we had lots of family in the New York area.
yeah.
So I had that feeling of being tied to the Northeast.
Yeah. Well,
I,
let's talk about Alabama because I suppose we don't really know much about it in the UK. We have some
Mhm.
images of the southern states of the US, which are, maybe not correct. So what was it like growing up there?
So it was a very easy life in many ways. I mean, but it was also very strange and isolated, because we didn't fit in very well. Uh, People were accepting of us,
Yeah,
and we did have some very good friends. But it was also we grew up as a family that was alone in
yeah,
many ways.
yeah,
My family was one of three Jewish families in the county, not this town, but in the county.
yeah.
and of Alabama. Alabama is a very interesting state. There are some incredibly courageous and brave people who have stood up for social justice forever.
Yeah.
I mean, the Southern Poverty Law Center is in Montgomery, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the most important museums now about the history of slavery in the United States, at least two of them are now in Montgomery.
Yeah.
So there are people who have been very forceful in their stances about social justice in the South, white and Black.
Yeah.
But that's not the overriding culture, I wouldn't say. So I went away to boarding school very early on. I went away in 8th grade.
Yeah.
And then had followed up with education at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and then went to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, for my PhD. From there, I then moved around the country, as academics often do in the United States, following academic positions, one in the Midwest, then in the upstate New York, then back in the Midwest, and then back to the College of New Jersey, where I was president for 19 years.
And what was your field of study then? What was the
English and American literature.
Okay.
My research for my PhD and the research that I wrote as a faculty member, because I spent 15 years as a faculty member before I became an administrator, was Jewish American literature.
Okay.
So I wrote a lot about Jewish American fiction and Jewish American poetry.
Okay. And tell us, just briefly, give us some of the headlines about Jewish American sort of literature. One would assume I would imagine, I know something about post-World War II literature, but also the psychological writings of Freud, etc., and that the influence analysis and so on.
Yeah, mine was purely fiction or poetry, so it wasn't nonfiction. And I wrote a lot about Saul Bellow, Mr. Sandler's Planet, Humboldt's Gift, a wonderful but quirky kind of writer.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a book on Jewish American poetry, which is not very often looked at.
Yeah.
It's mostly the fiction that people focus on, but there's a whole body of Jewish American poetry that's very interesting.
Right. And was this sort of Jewish American, one thinks of the Jewish American intelligentsia as quite often centered around New York and those areas.
New York, and then if you're looking at Bellow, Chicago.
Okay. All right. Well, those would be the sort of big centers of Jewish culture.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
They're not really spread very much in that sense.
Interestingly enough, there's actually some interesting places of Jewish American culture in the South.
Yeah.
And I've recently been involved in an organization, the Southern Jewish Historical Society, which has done some very interesting research, particularly about the Southern Jewish culture in Charleston, South Carolina, and in New Orleans.
New Orleans I knew about because I had a surgeon on the show a couple of weeks ago who's a Jewish man, and that's where he grew up. And
I think I watched a portion of that.
Yeah, he was telling me about his growing up there and that there was quite a strong Jewish community there. And I was like flabbergasted because it never occurred to me. Do you know what I mean?
There really is. There really
One
is.
of those things. So I'm guessing, and the reason I'm asking these questions is I'm guessing that it was quite a sort of niche area of writing in terms of introducing that to the sort of US academic.
Well, it wasn't. I had many predecessors in that area of focus, not in the poetry, but in the fiction.
Okay.
There was quite a body of literature.
So it's got quite a strong foothold in the sort of academic world, as it were.
Yes, in the academic world. Yeah.
Okay, great.
There was a period of time when Saul Bellow, Bernard Malamud, Philip Roth were very popular writers, and
so writing, being an expert in that would give you quite a powerful voice in some ways, maybe?
No, I wouldn't. I don't know that it did that in terms of, the higher education community, but it wasn't unusual, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And what about the place of female Jewish writers within that as well.
Very few have been highlighted. There's some very good ones.
Yeah.
Cynthia Ozick is one of my favorites. If you've not
Yeah.
read her, you should. She's just brilliant,
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. But it was a very male-dominated sort of genre.
Yeah.
But so is American literature, for that matter.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so is much of literature. So, and I'm sort of interested in that. An ex-partner of mine is an English Doctor of English as well, in the UK, and she wrote some really interesting stuff about sort of 16th, 17th century English women writers, and sort of I just became interested in this, how certain voices are excluded, and really that's what I'm sort of getting to about sort of being there, because in some ways you have this story, don't you, of somebody who is in the middle of cultures that maybe don't get you. And sort of,
Yeah.
so
Yes.
from early days you were
Yes.
sort of, as sort of like
That don't
almost
get
like
me.
a foreigner in your own country, as it were.
Yeah. As I've said to others, I was very often the only whatever in the room.
Yes,
Woman, Jew, liberal, Southerner,
that's
whatever.
right. That's brilliantly said. I love that. I'm going to steal that if that's all right.
You're welcome to.
That's absolutely superb. So you were the other, the
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
that concept of othering, which I presume is a concept that in the US you
Yes.
know very well. So
Yes.
just for people who don't understand it, turning somebody into the other is the beginnings of the idea that we're not just the same as human beings. In our minds, we have these mental constructs where we create some people as the others, whatever that other is. It could be other because they're female, black, Jewish, whatever it is, but we create, if you like, mental scapegoats. And people are othered in that way. So just for people to understand. Was that sort of terminology around when you were in the early days of your academia?
No, not in the early days. Not in
Right.
the,
So I'm interested
but I
in,
experienced it.
yes, no, it was there as a phenomenological reality, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm interested sort of in how did you manage this sort of stuff? Because I guess when I think about it, when were you training as an academic or doing your early academic studies?
So I was in a PhD program from 1970 to 1975.
So it's just during the second wave feminism movement.
Yes. Yes.
So people were still very resistant to these ideas, I seem to remember.
Yes, and also while women were moving more into the academy, um, you know, the heterosex, the dual sex. I mean, there were always women who were leaders in the single sex educational
Yes.
institutions.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about both male and female students and institutions, women were just beginning to move into in any kind of leadership roles as
Right.
faculty members. But it was really during my career that women became more had a greater presence. We've never been predominant, have had a greater presence in administrative roles.
Okay. And would you, like these days, just so that people have a context, what would be the sort of balance these days?
So these days, we're very proud that there are now women presidents or chancellors, depending on the institution, but the CEO at about 30% of institutions.
Right.
That's just outrageously low. If you
But it's a massive improvement on where it started.
but it's a massive improvement.
Yeah.
And also up until recently, most of that presence of women as leaders in higher education were in a certain kind of institution. For instance, you would find, I don't know if you know about the community college movement.
I guess we could guess what it's about, but you tell us.
And so a community college is a 2-year college that is often centered on developing skills as opposed to liberal arts education, let's say. Or and sometimes those students transfer into baccalaureate institutions, but more often than not, they do not.
Right.
So presidents were, if you're looking at the numbers, just the sheer numbers, that's where most of the women presidents sat up until about 10, 15 years ago.
Okay.
Then women presidents began appearing. I mean, in my lifetime, the first Ivy League institution hired a woman, and then more did that. And of course, recently they have been highlighted because of those rather problematic congressional hearings in December, when
Yeah.
all three of those presidents who were interviewed were women.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll come back to that in a minute, and we can sort of look at the
Yes,
context.
let's do.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to that point quickly, but it's because I think there's a big difference between the UK and the US, and we need to do a little bit of the backstory.
Sure.
And just to be explicit about, we were talking before the show started, the recording, why I wanted you on is that the world is struggling at the moment with sort of severe adversity and extremism. So I think voices like yourself are really important to hear. People who've, like yourself, who've ploughed a furrow, as it were, and had to sort of negotiate through quite a lot of extremism, whether it was politely done or impolitely done, and be a very successful, if you like, politician, a person who can bring people together, because that's what you've done throughout your life, while also having a unique voice and ploughing that furrow. So I think those stories are very important. That's the explicit message I want to get across to people. But I need to sort of get this backstory rather frustratingly so that people understand the context. So you were sort of, if you like, forging ahead as a young sort of academic, developing your voice, developing your research base and your professional skills. What was it like for you? What was the sort of experience of going into the academy, which would have been incredibly sort of waspish, male, etc., etc.?
Well, I have a very vivid memory of my first interview for the institution where I got my first job.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and at the time was the beginning wave of the difficulty of getting tenure track jobs, which are the coin of the realm in higher education in the United States, is to get a job to which you can, after a couple of years, you can attain tenure.
Yeah.
And I was interviewed for a job in the Midwest, and I was out to dinner with the full professors. That would be the committee of professors who would actually make the decision about hiring me.
Yeah.
And I remember one person saying, I was married and my husband didn't come with me. And I remember one gentleman asking me, "So your husband will let you come to this job?" And I said, "Well, yes." But I first interpreted that what he meant was that come to the interview, not come to the job. And I said, "Well, I think he feels he can trust me for one night." And he said, "Oh, no, no, no. I mean, certainly he's not going to follow you." I mean, so the whole thing was just such a shock to realize what their expectations were and what my expectations were,
Yeah.
and figure out how to explain to them that not only was he okay with me interviewing for the job, that yes, he would follow me, which he has for 54 years, and that was really okay in our relationship. It was just a complete different perspective of the role of women.
Yeah, and it's also, but it is, as you're saying, the nature of an academic's job that you're going to move. Every academic move.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's how the career works. You can't
That's
stay in one institution and have
not if you want to progress. You can't.
No, not at all. Not at all. And so you're in many ways sort of challenging some stereotypes and some belief systems. Did you, apart from that sort of rather paternalistic approach, did you also face more explicit discrimination directed at you?
Well, I mean, yes, probably so. Some of it was so subtle, you just you'd have to look back and interpret it. For instance, why weren't you chosen to take on that particular leadership role? And there could be any number of reasons. But particularly during my interview, when I was there were two particular moments in time when I did a whole series of interviews as I was looking for tenure track, as I was looking for senior leadership roles in academia. And at one particular moment in time, as I was looking for a senior administrative role, there suddenly was a change in the expectations of committees. In the past, those who had had these roles as provosts or chief academic officers had come from a range of disciplines, but mostly in the humanities, in English, in history, in social science, or in the social sciences. Suddenly, everybody was looking for someone in the sciences, in the hard sciences. They wanted somebody from physics. They wanted somebody from biology. And if you look at it at that particular moment in time, the only women who were prepared to take on roles as senior leadership in academia roles were from the humanities.
Okay.
And this was sort of like an evidence of institutional sexism.
Yeah.
That they simply couldn't see you in that role. They couldn't see you in that role. And again, it wasn't explicit, but it was so peculiar. It was so peculiar to see that change. And it was just within 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And eventually, when I did get a senior leadership role, I became much more conscious of helping people see what their expectations were, and were some of their expectations, or what they described as desires, basically another interpretation of an institutional racism or sexism attitude.
Yeah. And so you were facing those sort of those structures that weren't made explicit.
Exactly.
There wouldn't have been the language for it probably that much anyway. Lack of insight, and also people were too polite in one sense to sort of
yes, that's exactly right.
Explicit about it. It would have been seen as rather bad form.
Well, it's interesting for the most part, except I did have one particularly vivid experience when I was teaching at this first place. I was in the faculty lounge. This was back in the time when there were faculty lounges and people sat around and smoked cigarettes and drank coffee. And I was in between classes, and a guy who was a very senior faculty member walks in and makes a comment and uses the N-word.
Okay.
I said, I don't like that word. Please don't ever use it in front of me. And he said, well, they need to get accustomed to it, just like you need to get accustomed to the word kike.
Wow.
So sometimes it was very explicit.
Yeah. And these days, I think if you did say that explicitly in that way, you'd face sort of quite human resources backlash. But it's interesting. It's interesting that there weren't the structures to challenge that, because it was also not, there weren't the systems in place to understand that that was just completely unacceptable. Let's fast forward a little bit now, because I want to jump into more like today, because I don't think people understand just how much of an attack has happened to education at every level. In terms of, and we see the sort of more in the UK, we see the more extreme versions of the book banning that's going on in some states in the US, but that encroachment in academic, liberal, educational freedoms has been going on for a bit longer than that, I feel. So when did you begin to notice this, do you think, that there was this sort of deliberate attempt to silence sort of research and free thought? And
I don't know that I can put my finger on a date.
Right.
But certainly throughout my career, I could see it. It has become much more, at least in the United States, much more explicit and I would say shameless. In other words, it existed before, but there was a little bit of, you were talking about politeness,
Yeah.
which was, for instance, my experience with any anti-Semitism that I experienced in the Deep South when I was a child.
Yeah.
People would not actually say things. They would just leave you out or imply that you couldn't understand. They were very polite about it. Now there's no need to be polite. And there's no need to be careful. I mean, if you look at some of the laws that are being passed in states like Texas and Florida,
Yeah.
They are very explicit about banning books,
Yeah.
about making it inappropriate to speak about certain topics or topics in a certain kind of way. About control of institutions. What's happened to New College, which is a wonderful little college in Florida, just wonderful little college, has been completely taken over
Mhm.
By a political perspective.
Yeah.
And it's not just that it's a political perspective, but it's a perspective that silences any other perspective.
Yeah.
And it is controlling hiring and firing of faculty, certainly of presidents and senior administrators, and thereby controlling what students can learn.
Yeah.
And it's not just that there's no shame, there's great pride.
Yeah.
In what has been accomplished.
Yeah.
This is very dangerous, and it's
Yes.
very dangerous, not just for the institute. I mean, it's terrible for New College, which I said it was a really fine little place. But it's dangerous for the students, and it's dangerous for democracy.
Well, we're seeing similar types of things. We've seen it before in the UK, but we're seeing similar types of things. So when I was younger, which was a while ago now,
Yeah.
If I can think back that far to when pterodactyls still roamed the earth, there was a thing in schools called Clause 28, and Clause 28 was brought in by Margaret Thatcher's government.
Okay.
And so that contextualizes it. So around about the time when you were forging through in building your career. But Clause 28 was a piece of legislation that it was the don't say gay thing.
Oh, okay.
Weren't allowed to promote homosexuality in school. Not that anybody was promoting homosexuality, but they invented a law for a problem that didn't exist. Because
Oh, yeah. Well, yes.
sort of like there wasn't a problem with promotion of homosexuality, so they had a law that said you can't promote homosexuality, and it's sort of like we're all a bit confused at the time. And
Yeah.
similar types of things are coming in around trans issues and gender fluidity, which is
Yeah.
the current storm that
Yeah.
happens. So originally it was LGBT, now it's trans, and so on and so forth. Well, originally I would say in the 70s it was women, to be honest. It was a sort of backlash against the second wave feminism. So we see that, and I'm reminded of Pastor Niemöller's little poem, which I'm sure you know very well, First They Came For, because
Yeah.
I didn't speak up.
Yeah.
So it is important, I think, that we understand this, and it is important that we understand there's a backstory and a context, particularly in Europe, to this type of behavior directly leading to atrocity. And we shouldn't accept, it's not an exaggeration.
No.
It's already happened. Within living memory, we just had the sort of D-Day anniversary over in Europe. Literally last week, the
Yes.
8th anniversary of the D-Day sort of landings, at which our Prime Minister managed to make himself look like a complete fool.
I'm sorry.
Because it was the French. We don't hang around with the French, so he just left.
Oh.
But what I'm saying is, it's in living memory. There are people alive still
Sure.
who fought against the Nazis, and they started in this way. That's what happened.
You know what's really interesting to me,
Yeah.
and I would love to hear your take on this, is I find it so interesting that the great espousers of this movement that you're describing have incorporated into their rhetoric the accusation that their opposition, that is someone who is actually standing against this limitation,
Yeah.
they're using the language that is the most offensive. They're calling them Nazis. I mean, I find it fascinating how Trump is telling his tale and accusing the Biden administration with all its, problems. They are not fascists. They aren't fascists. They
Completely
may
the
have
opposite.
problems, but they're not fascists.
Yeah.
And then to accuse them of what they are themselves, but to accuse someone, I find that. Tell me how that works.
In psychology, we call it projection. It's
Oh, okay, so it
narcissistic
is just
projection.
projection. Okay.
Simple narcissistic projection, which
Okay.
is fairly easy to understand. Every time something comes out of his mouth, which is an accusation against somebody else, it's because he's doing it.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And it's a
Okay. Because
complete smoke and mirrors. So
it's just like, wait
yeah,
a minute. It's
very
like
simple.
it's like when Putin accuses Zelensky of being a Nazi.
Yeah, absolutely, which is really quite extraordinary given his
Quite
own personal
extraordinary.
history.
Exactly.
But the if we put that word aside, and I think that's that word itself, the Nazis and so on,
Yeah.
is being thrown around by
Mhm.
left and right, and particularly they're looking at it in the context of the Middle East and Hamas and
Mhm.
Israel and Zionism, etc. So it gets used all the time. Let's think about the forces of oppression versus the forces of liberation. They are maybe slightly more neutral terms now that people.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
So if we think about democratic freedom, which I think you and I would want to see, and that is important, and certainly freedom of thought is a very important value that I have, and I'm guessing it's a value that you have, freedom of thought, and
Absolutely.
yeah, Uh,
Yes.
and I think it's intrinsically important that people are educated to the level that they can bear, want to be, have an interest in. And I think it's intrinsically important that people are taught about difference and diversity. These are intrinsically important human experiences, as far as I'm concerned. And I see you nodding away. You would agree
Yes.
with that, I guess?
I would. And one of the things that I think those of us who consider ourselves liberal,
Yeah,
and liberal in the academic circle have to own up to
yeah,
is that as we began advocating, which was the right thing to do, for increasing representation from underrepresented groups,
yeah,
and providing the understanding of difference that is so important for that to work. We sometimes focus too much on the first, increasing the representation,
yeah,
and not enough on the second, understanding. And as a consequence, I think we created unintentionally, and I don't believe there was any intentionality in this. Unintentionally, we created another kind of set of otherness. That
yeah,
is, if you didn't belong to a
yeah, yeah,
particular
yeah.
kind of victimized group, you sort of didn't count.
Well, the
That was a
stratification,
mistake.
that stratification of oppression was
Yes,
also
yes.
a dumb thing to do because
It,
it denied this universal quality of being a human being.
correct,
And the
correct.
universal quality of being a human being is what's important in all of this. And so, and I think there are problems with the academy being too intellectual.
I think that's absolutely true.
It's built into the nature of it.
Yeah,
And people get caught up in ideas and thoughts without, well, what
right.
does that happen on the ground, as it were? But actually, I think that some of the progressive elements of the academy, bringing in female voices, bringing in black voices, bringing in gay and lesbian voices, etc., would have always made that point.
Yeah,
And so the notion that the personal is political was very much second wave feminism was saying, no, you can't just split all this stuff off. We've got to understand things in context. But I think that, and I guess what you're talking about is the move into wokeism and stuff like that, and how that has become a sort of a tribal thing.
yeah.
Um,
Eh,
how do we avoid that splitting off, I guess?
because it's counterproductive.
Yeah,
Because at some point, some group that you might identify with is going to split in another way, and you're not going to have a place. And in some ways, you're never going to have a place in any one. I mean, one of my experiences, and I write about in the book, Experiences the Angled Road, is that I never lived my life as someone who was a feminist, a woman only,
Right.
or Jew only, or a Southerner rarely, or an intellectual always. What I mean. I had, I think, the privilege of being forced to see myself with all these lenses,
Yeah.
and I think it gave me a great advantage that other people don't have.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, which I
Sure.
really appreciate your response to. One is because my sense of intersectionality, which is part of the title of your book,
Yeah.
is that it is an attempt to be a human being who understands that the experience of being a human being can be quite fractured at times, and
Right.
to try and that makes sense to me. What would be your sort of definition of intersectionality in that sort of context?
And well, it'd be exactly what you said. That is
Right.
that is someone who recognizes that their sense of self is not with one tribe,
Right.
one identity.
Yeah. And I think, like psychologically, I would say that we're going through a huge transition in terms of this whole identity stuff. And my sense in which people have identified with tribal politics and tribal versions of themselves is because we're going through radical psychological changes.
Oh,
So
okay.
there are theorists at the moment who argue that the internet, for example, is as important as the changes that took place in the human psyche in 16th, 17th century, which
Okay.
was, as you know, the printing press and the translations of texts into indigenous languages and so on. And that had a significant shift in human psyche. So, and it's linked to the second question. And something Obama once said, which I thought, I mean, there's a lot of what Obama said that was just profoundly, deeply moving and intelligent and insightful. The guy seemed to ooze sort of intelligent and insightful. But I tend towards a more Foucaultian sense in these things. And for me, sort of one of the things Foucault said centrally was that power exists in everything, in the oppressed and the oppressor. And that when you have the operation of power, you will have a resistance to it. And you will have a counter response to it. And he's really thinking about in the philosophical linguistic area, but the language of freedom and the language of oppression are inherent with the processes of power. And what I suppose what he was saying was my freedom can be your oppression. And that
Yeah.
if I don't understand that, there's going to be a problem. And something Obama said after he finished his presidency, he said something along the lines of Trump was inevitable after me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I don't what you said, but I don't know that Obama's comment makes sense, but or that I agree that Trump was inevitable. What you said makes sense. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure that what Foucault said makes sense. I'm not sure that Trump was inevitable. There were some serious mistakes made in the Democratic Party, and by Hillary Clinton as the spokesman for the Democratic Party,
Yeah.
that made it happen. I mean, the ground was fertile for it, but it did not have to be. It did not have to be.
Okay. So would you say there's been a much more of a systematic approach? So let's say if we put the personalities out of the side, where has all this come from in your experience then? Where the current situation where there's such a significant...
Well, I mean, I think there's been this undercurrent all along, and there's an undercurrent in America. I'm talking that I really only know about American politics. I could just speculate on others, because I think there is, as you pointed out at the beginning of the conversation, there is an uptick in right-wing celebration of nationalism across the world. But in the United States, there has always been an undercurrent of that. That is not new. I mean, Henry Adams is famous as having said, when immigrants came to the United States, there's one famous article that he wrote in which he said, "You're welcome to come here, and then you become like us, or you can go back across that large ocean to wherever you came from." And so that's an undercurrent even in the intellectuals in the United States. There's also an undercurrent of suspicion of intellectuals in the United States, a long tradition of that has only become exacerbated, all of which is sort of bubbling in there. But what made it that that MAGA Republicans took over the Republican Party is not easily explained to me. It really isn't, because the principles of the Republican Party, as I understood them, was so much for certain kinds of principles that have nothing whatsoever to do with the MAGA movement.
Yeah, it's extraordinary because it is nothing at all. They're not.
It has nothing to do with. I mean, small government, less taxes. That's the only thing that seems to run through the MAGA movement. Less taxes, but all the services. Less taxes, but all the services.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that I can explain it. I think there's just a combination of all sorts of things, and a guy who is a master at manipulating social media, and he's a master at, he's a performer.
Yeah, and he's been working on this for some time. We now know.
Oh, absolutely,
not come out of nowhere.
But... And let's remember, he didn't care which party he went for.
Yeah, no, he didn't try.
He was a Democrat for a period of time.
That's right. But demagogues are like that; they don't really care.
No, precisely.
It's simply about, but it is something about tribalism, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And the dual party system, which we have in the UK as well, and people vote along tribal lines. And so, in a sense, he has rather cuckoo-like taken over something that people will vote for, but they're not really voting for him. So if you go, like most people, I think, don't think overly much about politics. They have made decisions a long time ago about which party to vote for.
I think that's true.
Interestingly, and this is interesting, and maybe the big difference between the UK and the US at the moment, one of the sort of right-wing populists that got to power in the UK, Boris Johnson, who was totally incompetent, didn't really know what he's doing, but a great populist rabble-rouser, sort of buffoon, presented this sort of buffoonery, but was politically very astute. One thing was he broke the tribalism of politics in the UK. So he managed to get certain areas of the UK to vote for him that historically always voted what you would think of as Democrats.
I see.
So they'd always voted blue, and then they shifted to voting red. That's in the US terms. In the UK, it's confusing because the colour's the other way around.
Exactly.
So I remember the first time I went to the US and somebody said, "I'm voting blue," and I thought, "What? Who are you voting for?" That would mean the right wing, but there you go. And it's really interesting that in the UK, I think we're just about to get a centre-left government in, and by a significant majority. And that has created, it seems, I would guess, Johnson has created some political mobility because he broke that tribalism.
Interesting.
In terms of the US, given that what's going on at the moment, the attack on the sort of intellectual establishment, the attack on the media establishment, we're seeing an attack on the judiciary as well. There's always been an attack on politicians, but they sort of deserve it, because why would you get into that if you're not prepared to deal with it? So they don't get much of my sympathy, to be honest. But given that the various tribes of identity politics, if you like, seem quite sort of fractured at the moment, what, in terms of your thinking about the current situation, what would be your belief is the core of trying to fix it? And I hear what you say about, Hillary Clinton making mistakes, because I
Yeah,
think she was talking to her base as opposed to the American people.
exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly
So,
right. And don't misunderstand me. I think she would have been a good president.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm
yeah.
saying.
But she
Um,
wasn't politically astute, I don't think, in the face
yeah,
of
yeah.
meeting that brute, to be
And
honest.
um there was a bit of arrogance too that came through that she that she couldn't warm to the, she wasn't like her husband. I mean, Bill Clinton was just a master at being able to pull a crowd in. And that just isn't her, but that not every politician has to be that.
Yeah.
So what is it that we could be doing? Well, I'll just have to be, honest. I'm a great believer in higher education. I really do
Right.
believe, and I'm an optimist too, and I believe in its power. And I believe we failed in many ways in higher education.
Okay.
We failed to help students in two major areas that would be extremely helpful right now. One is actually being able to listen to the other. And I had a very interesting lesson taught me by a student when I was president at TCNJ, or a couple of students. And this was, I was president when first Obama was elected, and the feeling on the campus was extraordinary. The
Yeah.
students really owned it. They believed that they had elected him. And I don't mean those particular students, but I mean that age group.
Yeah.
And then, of course, 8 years later, Trump was elected. And there was a similar strong feeling, a similar level of feeling, but exactly the opposite. They felt as if they had failed. And one of the things that happened is as we started putting into place procedures and groups and processes that would help students process this new world that they were going into, we thought we were doing the right thing. And I got a couple of communications, emails from students, very thoughtful students, who said, you may think you're communicating that you want to hear from us, but that is not what we're hearing.
Okay.
We're hearing that you're saying you have in your head a way, and not just me, but the administration in general, has a way you want us to think. And if we're thinking that way, you'll help us. And if we're not, you won't. I had to listen to that.
Okay.
And I had to learn that instead, I had to turn to organizations that actually were focused on communicating across difference.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think that sometimes in our attempt to help one particular element of the student body, we are forgetting that there might be somebody who thinks other.
Yeah.
And that would be true with faculty. So that's one thing that I think we failed in. The other thing, or that we need to work harder at, and if you look at the institutions that had fewer problems in the fall, they were all institutions that had in place these kinds of communication structures. Dartmouth College is a fabulous example. Now,
Mhm.
they've just recently had some protests that caused trouble, but in the fall, they were in very good shape. They had students who were in a healthy way disagreeing with one another on the Palestinian issue and the Hamas attack.
Yeah.
And that was because they had those structures in place. The other thing that I think higher education has not done well is, and this is in this whole mental health crisis that has been hitting institutions of higher education in the United States so heavily in the last 15 years or so,
Mm.
there has not been enough, there's been a lot of effort put into providing resources and support, but it was never, what do you do next? It was
Mm.
never how you develop resilience. It was how we help you feel right now and how we help you feel better and
Yeah.
safer.
No, I think that's spot on.
And it's
Really,
really
absolutely.
problematic
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I have to be honest, for instance, with when the Jewish students, when you hear Jewish students being articulate about how they are feeling threatened, and therefore someone needs to do something about it, I want to say to them, no, 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 no. What are you going to do about
Yeah,
it?
no, I agree.
Now, I'm not talking about violently, but how are you going to handle that? Because let me tell you, young man or young woman, there is anti-Semitism out there. And just my being the president and saying I don't agree with it is not going to protect you from that.
Yeah, yeah. There
Because there are
needs to be,
anti-Semites out there. I don't know what to say. I mean, I'm
yeah,
sorry about that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So coming to the hearings, we're going to jump. We're running out of
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
There is never enough time in the show. Oh, I always say to people, oh, it's an hour. They go, an hour, that's too much time, but there's never enough time because the conversations need to coming to the hearings that happened with the presidents. So
Mhm.
give us the sort of backstory around sort of these hearings in
Well,
Congress.
the three hearings that have happened so far couldn't have been more different, and they've illustrated all sorts of things, some of the themes we've talked about already. The
Yeah,
first hearing you might remember, which happened in December, were three women from three Ivy League institutions. Only 1% of the population in the United States is educated at an Ivy League
yeah,
institution.
yeah.
So, with all due respect, who cares what's happening on their campuses? I'm
Mhm.
sorry. It's just not the vast majority of Americans, but that's who we're going to talk about. So, first of all, there was that issue. Second, it was that there were three women. And
Mhm.
absolutely, there's no question in my mind, while I thought they did not do a good job, I thought they did not do a good job. Part of the attack and part of the animus of the attack was based on the revealed all sorts of sexism, even by Elise Stefanik, who is a woman.
Mhm.
But a woman can be a sexist too.
Yeah,
And so I think there was part of that. Furthermore, they were prepared very, very poorly,
yeah,
and they were trained to speak in this kind of very careful judicial, legalistic kind of language to keep them out of trouble, which of course only got them in more trouble.
yeah.
And at some point, they just needed to talk from principle.
Mhm.
And when someone says that Hamas is an organization that I support wholeheartedly and in a full-throated kind of way, I think you can say, no, that's a bad thing to say. I think it's okay to say that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not so sure that from the river to the sea, that particular phrase carries the same import to me because I think there are ways of interpreting it.
Mhm.
I don't think there's a way to interpret Hamas as anything other than what they say they are.
It's very much.
I'm just
It's
taking
on the
their
tin,
word for it.
isn't it? It's definitely on the tin with
I'm
that.
taking their word for it, not your word for it,
Yeah,
their word for it.
yeah,
So my point is they should have been a little bit more absolute. The second hearing where President Sharif from Colombia spoke was a little bit of an overcorrection, but she still did a good job, a much better job. On the other hand, she did throw some principles of higher education under the bus,
yeah,
including academic freedom, including the rights of a faculty member, excuse me, to be an idiot.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Be
faculty
human.
members
Right.
say all sorts of kinds. As we started out in this conversation,
Yeah.
when you said I was the boss, I was never the boss of any faculty member because that's just doesn't happen. And yes, some of these faculty members said some outrageous things, but that doesn't necessarily mean they should not have been granted tenure.
Yeah.
The third hearing, which was more recently, was interestingly all men. And it was the first time and I think there was a different manner in the questioning. And some of that had to do with the fact that they were men. The other thing had to do with the fact that finally some public institutions were in front of the congressional hearing. And they actually have experience in dealing with politicians.
Yeah.
And they also have experience in dealing with how to handle this question of the First Amendment and freedom of speech
Yeah.
and how to actually manage that very, very difficult conundrum when people are saying hateful things.
Yeah.
And they just have more experience at it. So it was a more satisfying, a little bit more contentious, but contentious from the president's point of view. They were standing up
They were more robust.
and
Yeah.
doing what they needed to do.
Yeah. And which is a very important thing as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure you'll agree with this. we have to protect centers of learning, even though they make mistakes, because they're not written into the Constitution necessarily, but they are an important part of the life of any country, any nation,
Absolutely.
any conglomeration. It's no surprise that the forces of repression first attack and burn the books. They always go there. And we need to see that. We really
Absolutely.
need to see that, really. That the Jesuit saying, give me the child, I'll give you the adult.
Yep.
And that's where everybody goes. And I think it is really important. And we're at the end, and I'm going to
Yeah.
make this point and allow you to make your point as well. And also, how do people get hold of your book? But it is really important that the whole of society understand the value of education and the freedom of education, whether it's left, right, middle, indifferent, the political discourse, all of it needs to be there. And I agree with you. I think there's some significant mistakes have been made about which voices have been excluded, for reasons of personal discomfort, for reasons of political indifference, etc. There are voices that are excluded. But it is really important that society understands the value, the intrinsic value of educated people.
Absolutely. And the statistics, at least I know in the United States, the statistics for not only lifetime income, but of health
Yes.
and of just general well-being is undeniable.
Yeah, there's a direct link between lack of education and poverty and ill health.
Yes.
You have a shorter life, you have a more distressing life, the less educated you are. It's really simple stuff. I mean, it's the most well-researched link that exists around.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In terms of your feeling about the current space that we're in, what would you want to give us out as a message? Because similar types of things are happening across the world. It's not just the US. What would be the sort of clear message you want to give to people, to our listeners?
Well, I think it sounds simplistic, but communication really is the basis of everything. And communication means listening as well as talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And listening with a sympathetic and or even more significantly, an empathetic ear.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's something about that resilience question that you brought up, which I think is really at the core of it. How do we
one of the
support...
things my brother and I talk about this often, and brother and sister and I, because of where we grew up. A lot of the people who are identified as MAGA supporters, you would suspect that many of them come from places like where we grew up, South Alabama.
Yeah.
And we knew people there that we loved and that loved us and who were wonderfully kind and wonderfully generous kind of people. So I think we can listen with an ear that sometimes our northern colleagues have not been able to hear.
Yeah.
And in that way realize, and this I think comes from my brother, where he points out that during the years when we as liberals were celebrating how everybody was doing so well, people from these communities were not doing well.
Yes.
They were not doing well. So the fact that they're disenchanted with the United States government as it exists now is obvious, because they have not been treated well. They have not been respected, and they have suffered. And we should sympathize with that. We should see why that has happened.
And we also need to learn the lessons of history, because that's what was going on during the Weimar Republic.
Exactly. Precisely.
Literally what happened. It's literally what happened. And what the National Socialists picked up on that dissension, and quite justified dissension as well. I mean, it was reasonable. There was a lot of poverty and a lot of oppression going on. Look, Barbara, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. I'm not sure if we got to any point at all, but it's just been a fascinating conversation. And like you, I'm a great fan of these types of conversations. And
I've enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, we need to encourage it more. Debate and dialogue and understanding.
Well, I hope that the people who listen will also want to read my book.
Yeah. How do we get hold of it? Tell us the title of it.
So Experience is the Angled Road,
Okay.
Memoir of an Academic, published by Kohler Books in 2022.
Yeah.
It's available on Amazon.com. And from now until June 28th, there's a special sale on the ebook for only 99 cents.
What?
Yes. Yes. So I hope everybody buys it.
Great.
And
Great.
I have another book coming out in January, Portrait of a Presidency,
Okay.
Pattern My Life as the President of the College of New Jersey. And that book is about my years as president.
Right.
Experience is the Angled Road is about my developing as a leader.
Yeah.
Mentors that had an impact on me and so forth. And the
And do
second
you do
book,
public speaking? Do you offer
absolutely.
do you have a website where people can get?
I do. I have a website, R.Barbara Gitenstein.com.
Great. And we'll make sure when the show goes out that links are to that.
Okay.
I thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you and to chat.
Pleasure to meet you too.
Yeah, and when you're in London, give me a shout.
I shall do that,
Go and
Noel.
do some pleasant things. It would just be such a joy to me to sort of hang out with you.
Thank you so much.
Have a
Best to
great day,
you.
mate.
When
You
you're in
stay
New
there.
York, let me know.
Yeah, I will do. I definitely. You stay there for a second. So, folks, I hope you've enjoyed that. I just want to sort of re-emphasize Barbara's message about dialogue. It's really, really the crucial thing in life. And so find somebody that you wouldn't have talked to today, but you will decide to talk to them. There we go. Take that as a lesson learned. Go and find somebody that you would avoid and talk to them and find out about them, find out about their life. You'll be making the world a better place. Lots of love to everybody, and I'll see you all at the next show. So bye-bye for now.